Since the earliest days of our existence as Homo erectus, the human race has been evolving not just in physical form, but with a consciousness that allowed us to interact with ourselves and each other, and to eventually be able to perceive and ask questions about the nature of our very being. We began to question whether that consciousness, that life force, or what some might call a soul, could exist beyond our mortal form. And if so, what happened to it when we died? This question has perplexed humanity since its beginning. But it wasn't until science began to find ways to extend life that we developed, perhaps, answers to that very question. It occurred through the stories that people recounted of their experiences as they teetered on that point between life and death and were brought back. Throughout the ages, religions and other spiritual belief systems developed around trying to explain it. And science looked for the physical mechanisms that would allow for it and perhaps even create it. Are these two paths to the truth contradictions, or the two parts of a bigger picture? These are the questions that our new series will be attempting to address and resolve. It is called To the Beyond and Back: Encounters with the Afterlife. My special guest today is Kristen Von Foxx. She will share with us her own experiences of such a journey, and I welcome her today.
It's nice to see you so much, Al.
You know, it was interesting how we came up with the idea to do this. When I was first starting to think about doing the Bridge of Truth, I wanted to call up the people that I had this previous journey with. And for some reason, I think you might have just said, I'd like to talk about something that happened to me. It was an afterlife experience. And as soon as you said that to me, immediately I knew that that's really what we were supposed to be doing this show about. So I think what I'd like, rather than me introduce you, why don't you share with the audience a little bit about yourself? Because you've been a guest on this show. I don't know, my previous viewers may know you from some of your other videos. You've had one of the most popular videos on the Bridge of Truth. I think your drumming meditation got almost 140,000 views. I don't even know if you're aware of that. And you've done marvelous meditations on manifesting and on spiritual protection. And so, Kristen, please share with our viewers sort of like what brought you to this point, because you've had really a fascinating and varied career.
Absolutely. Well, my name is Kristen, and I have been a shamanic practitioner for the last 12 years. My whole background is in psychotherapy, and I started out as a creative arts therapist. And it's just so happened, as it does for most of us, it's through our portal of crisis that we come to this deeper understanding of ourselves. And for me, that was a quarter life crisis where I lost everything. I lost my marriage, I lost my home, and it cracked me open. And I realized that all of the psychological tools that I had were simply not enough to address the wounds of the soul, which sent me on a personal journey over the last decade plus of learning about different indigenous cultures, studying with different medicine men and women all over the world, and some in indigenous cultures, off the grid, in the jungle, working to understand some of their most powerful healing techniques that address wounds of the soul as opposed to the wounds of the psyche, which I was taught in creative arts therapies and psychotherapy, where if there's a wound or a trauma that happens, that we build up the rest of the healthy ego. But in shamanism, and you look at different cultures cross-culturally, you find that we look at the soul and know that the soul can become fragmented as a result of trauma. It's the same thing as dissociation or disconnecting from different parts of ourselves. And I was fascinated by this. And I found that once I started to use some of these ancient techniques like soul retrieval, my whole life began to change. I all of a sudden felt like I was who I was before the traumas that happened to me in my life. I was able to get back my confidence, my bubbly energy that I lost during one of my traumatic episodes of losing everything in that first divorce. And it sent me on this journey to understand how I could integrate these soul healing shamanic tools into everyday psychotherapeutic practice. And the rest is history. And it's been such a beautiful journey to learn that there are other ways that have been hidden from us to activate parts of our spirit, to come into alignment with who we really are, and to feel joy again, especially if we've been through heartache or trauma. So that's a lot of the work that I do, is to help those who have been through heartache, that have disconnected from their true self because of what they've been through, get their power and passion for life back, which in turn really enhances and brings so much more joy and confidence in their own experience, but also attracts healthier relationships and heals those soul wounds that are attracting experiences that are challenging, so they can step more fully into their joy and their power.
Yeah, I remember the first time I met you, which was quite some time ago. You had this wonderful energy. I think that's what attracted me to you initially. So whatever you had been through that sort of had taken that away from you. You certainly managed to get past that. And I don't know if you want to address more specifically the types of tools that you've been using, because I know that you have a regular practice, you have meetings online with people. You're called the Shamanatrix, which I think is an incredible name that you've have for yourself with your website. Is there anything else you'd like to add to that in terms of, before we move on to the afterlife portion of the show?
Well, I think that as we transition into the true story that's here, it's really these tools that led me on the journey that we're going to be talking about. As soon as you start connecting in with your guides, your ancestors, magic begins to happen. And it's really like when you're on the shamanic path, just like when you're on the spiritual path, it's different for everybody. And it's whatever path is true for you will show itself with those little energetic spiritual breadcrumbs of this intuition or this magnetic pull in your soul, that you're just guided to a certain person or a certain place. I think that's how we met.
Yes.
We met at a party
Yes.
where we were both
Yes.
attracted to the coat rack, and then we both just stood there like, why are we standing here? And it was because we were supposed to make a connection. So following that soul pull has been a big part of my work. And in that crisis point that I spoke about, when I had that falling out with my ex-husband, who emptied my bank account, fled the country, cheated on me, there was a lot of heartbreak there. But what happened through that portal of my life essentially falling apart in that iteration, that was not in alignment with my true self and what I was really meant to do, and not the reason I was truly here on this planet. But what I found is that it is important to allow the universe to open things up. And even if we feel like we've lost everything, there's actually a breadcrumb trail that leads us to our correct path. And that's what I found in the shamanic journey, is that everything fell away from my life that I thought was supposed to be for me. So a new magical path could emerge, which I haven't gotten off the path since. And every time I have, well, the universe creates an external experience in my life to bring me back, which is one of the reasons why I'm back on the scene after a hiatus, after heartbreak. Again, like, we go through these lessons and they activate us, which was that near-death experience that I had and the guidance that I received on the other side that redirected me to my path after I had swayed and gone into a new direction.
Yeah, I can certainly relate to the idea of having to take a hiatus. When I did a few weeks ago my show with Sheikh Mariam, I realized that I hadn't posted anything in almost 7 years. I had your videos that were in the can, and so fortunately I could create some new content. And I had a few other things that I managed to find in the vault. But yeah, I hadn't done anything because my life, I was involved with taking care of my parents, and I had to completely shift my focus. And now my life has turned around again. I won't go into the details of why, but nonetheless, here we are. And it seems to be time now for us to share this further information for this other purpose, which I don't think either of us were anticipating when I first called you to become and be a part of this again. I'd like to know, before we get into about the afterlife, how did you learn about these tools that you now practice? Did you study them? Did you go someplace? Did you have a teacher? And I say that because maybe somebody else might like to know how you did it.
I've had many different teachers. And again, when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And at that portal of time when I was awakening and started seeing full body apparitions and experiencing spirits that were trapped, I was working at the New York City Open Center. And it was during that time that, the breadcrumb trail is real. I had a book on soul retrieval written by Sandra Ingerman, who was one of my most profound teachers. I think because we have a very similar background. She's a psychotherapist from Brooklyn, and I was living in Brooklyn for 15 years. And there was a book on soul retrieval that fell off the shelves right in my direction after other people had been planting the seed. I had never heard about shamanism or soul retrieval, and it was flooding my world out of nowhere. And literally the books were falling at my feet to say, pick this up and look at this. And so that was really the entry point into learning about shamanism and soul retrieval. I had been having the opportunity to take all of these classes at the New York City Open Center, so I was able to study in some of these workshops, but it was really with Sandra Ingerman was my main teacher. And then my interest changed into plant medicine work, and I went with one of my mentors to study with her teacher in the Amazon jungles with the Shipibo people outside of Iquitos, Peru. And that was another initiation into my journey. And at this point, I've had about 17 different teachers that I have apprenticed under, worked with, and I've studied with different medicine people. Not all of them call themselves shamans, right? I have a Navajo elder that I work with and a Algonquin elder who I'm very close with. And so many teachers have shown themselves and really, what's the advice for people to find their teachers? Your teachers will find you. It doesn't have to be hard. You don't have to look too far. Sometimes they just appear.
Yeah, it's funny you should even talk about that, because I had a very similar experience when I was writing my book. I devoted 12 years of my life to it as a book on the integration of religion and science, kind of led me to everything that I've been doing since. And I had heard all these, people, these teachers say, well, when you're in the flow, in the zone, or whatever you might want to call it, all of a sudden these things come to you. I'd go into a shop and all of a sudden there'd be a book there on a table that I had to pick up. Somebody would all of a sudden, I'd meet them at a meeting, and like in your case, we have to be somebody that was supposed to meet. So yeah, it absolutely does happen. I mean, it's part of the mystery of how the spiritual energy works and flows and supports us. And that's part of what we're going to be talking about. And you mentioned something very in the beginning of that last thing that you said about apparitions. And that, I think, is something that ties into the general theme of the show, because we've talked about this before, about the idea of the veil kind of like getting thinner now. And I know that we're going to talk about that towards the end, but I didn't know, I wasn't so aware of the apparition aspect of your path. So that's really interesting to hear about that. And I imagine we'll be talking about that more in the future too, because I have certain plans and ideas which I'll share with you and our audience as we go. But now back to the main event. When I asked you if you wanted to be a part of the show, and you said, nah, I'm not really into doing this, but there's something I would like to talk about. And you told me about your afterlife experience, and I knew, well, we had to do that, because I had done in the old show a couple of episodes on the afterlife, but I never really got to do it in depth, and I never got to do it without being in the context of some religious experience. And I think that that's really important, because it's very easy to just say, well, this, if you believe in this religion or that so-and-so, then you may either open up your mind to it or be preconditioned to that sort of thing. But in your case, it seemed like a much more natural and the type of thing that perhaps separates us from any specific belief. So I hope you could begin to tell us about that, what happened to you, because it happened, I guess, during this dark night of your soul when this sort of happened, correct?
Well, it happened only a couple months ago. In June 30th is the day that I died of 2022.
But you were doing well then, weren't you? I mean, what do you think brought this on?
All right. Well, there's some very specific things that brought this on. I'm going to bring us back to that breadcrumb trail, because for anyone who's listening and sees their breadcrumb trail, sometimes it's filled with lessons that are a little bit different than what we had expected. And in this case, I was doing a lot of genealogy research. My parents had always told me that I was 14 generations from Pocahontas. And I was so interested in learning more about her. And I have some pictures on my ancestor altar of my 7th generation ancestor, Catherine Margaret Houston Burns, or Catherine Houston Margaret Burns. And she is a spitting image of me and my teacher believed was part Micmac. And my Algonquin elder sort of analyzed some of these photos and was like, yes, like, looking into the lineage. And some synchronicities happened around that. As soon as I was called, I felt like my parents were going to kick me out of the family. It was a premonition that I had. And that did happen because I practiced shamanism and they were not on board. They're fundamentalist Christians. And truly, they don't really know what shamanism is, but it was very scary to them. And, peace to all the Christians. They've come after me with the pitchforks in some of our videos before, and I bless them all. There's a deeper understanding because shamanism predates all organized religion. And it's essentially that every being is an important piece of the web of life and we're all connected. And as I was connecting in with my ancestral lineage and feeling very connected to it, I was married twice, and my second husband, who I got a divorce from in 2021, 2022, we brought up all of each other's ancestral stuff. And it was messy, it was ugly, it was hard, it was beautiful. And at the end of our relationship, I felt very guided to ask for the divorce, to ask for him to support me to break an ancestral curse for the women in my family that were in relationships that weren't in alignment with their fullest growth, but were a repeating ancestral pattern that were connected to the women not fully being able to be themselves. And I was playing out stuff, I hate to say it, like the dad stuff with my ex-husband. And he had my mother's birthday. His mother and my father had similar birthdays within a few days of each other the same year. There was a lot of synchronicities about family. And I helped him move through a really big ancestral curse. And at the end, I was so depleted. There was a lot of patterns that were unhealthy. I asked to leave the marriage. We had a beautiful, amicable divorce. He felt like I supported him so much, and he knew that there was something deeper here for me that I needed to break away, to break patterns for my ancestral lineage. And it was after that moment, as I was grieving, and that's actually what took me off my path. I kind of stayed down in the dumps for a little bit longer than I would like to admit, unsure of my path because it was so painful, right? Heartache can really hurt. And so I was down and out for the count. I was seeing minimal clients on my roster. I was not doing any new outreach or new big events. And I had also moved away from my community and my ex-husband, because we lived in the city and I live upstate New York. And it was on this journey that I felt so called to explore more of my father's ancestry, because my father's stuff was coming up in this marriage, in this divorce. And I knew that I helped my ex do his work, and now it was time for me to pull away and do mine. And as I was reading this book on the oral traditions about Pocahontas from her lineage, there's a different story to be told. And the story is actually really traumatic. Here's the trigger warning for us all. Trigger warning, everyone. There was forced sexual connection. There was kidnapping, there was murder, and I learned that her true story was actually incredibly traumatic, and that many aspects of the horrors that she went through happened in my ancestral lineage through my father's side, including in my father's side, rape, abuse, being cast out of the family, having to leave the family. These were all patterns that I was very familiar with. And I knew that there was something of healing for me. And after I read this book and I was crying and I was feeling so much energy around it, there was a very clear, intuitive message that came through that said I needed to go to have an ancestral pilgrimage to the waterways of the Chesapeake Bay area where my ancestors were from, to essentially connect in with Pocahontas and her father and the lineage. And I didn't know why. That was very unclear. There was no, you got to do this to do that. It was more of, there's some healing for you to break this ancestral, it felt like a curse, this ancestral cycles. And all I knew is I needed to go to the Chesapeake Bay area and in the Jamestown settlement area, and I needed to connect with the waterways. And I'm an avid kayaker. My boyfriend and I love kayaking. And so I asked him, will you come on this trip with me in the spring? It was late spring, pretty much early summer. Will you go with me on this trip so that I can connect with my ancestors? There's a healing that's supposed to happen here. And I don't know much more than that, but I'm going to go. Will you go with me? And I'm really glad that he did, because he's truly the reason I'm still alive. Although My opinion is that maybe this experience would have happened in a slightly different way if I was alone. But in this case, he saved my life. But I was called to go to many different waterways, but the Mattapony River was sticking out in my mind as I needed to spend the last day there. And we took a trip, and we camped, and we went on the waterways, and I brought my drum, I brought cedar, I brought tobacco, and I didn't know what I was supposed to do with it other than pray, sing, make offerings, let the land know that I'm grieving as a descendant the harms that happened to my lineage from that particular point. And that was it, an open heart and going on this trip. And it was ironic because my partner was oftentimes very far away from me on this kayak. But the moment that I had the NDE, he was right next to me. And thank God, because like I said, like he did save my life in this particular incident.
Right. So, yeah, I find that really interesting that you're bringing all these points up, particularly regarding the timing, about how everything seemed to work, because you said, well, maybe it would have happened in another way. Something would have happened, but it wouldn't have been that. But at the same time, the universe, not only did the universe provide you with the opportunity to have the experience, but it provided you with what you needed to survive it. And I've had that happen. So I understand where that is. And that's a remarkable thing. It has a lot to do with, I think what we'll be exploring down the road in terms of why that happens. Why do we develop this connection? I guess the book, The Secret, kind of got into it a little bit, but you're a living example of actually manifesting the truth of how the universe provides exactly what we need and the tools to survive it in some cases. So now, please get into the near-death experience itself.
So it was the last day on the trip, and it was the Mattapony River was calling, and I got this little trinket. It's across the room. I wish I grabbed it. I might grab it at the end to show you. It was this Pocahontas sun catcher that I got from the Jamestown settlement area, and I wanted to have something to remember this by. And I remember it fell out of the car and it shattered into pieces right before this experience happened. And I remember looking at it, and the initial feeling was grief and sadness that the one thing that I got to commemorate this experience shattered. But I heard, you broke it, you broke it, you broke the curse. And so I just took that as, okay, this is a bigger message here.
Yeah.
Which ended up translating into what happened inside my body. So we're on the Mattapony River. We're in our kayaks. My partner is fishing, and he's not that far away from me. He comes over to me, and we're just having a wonderful time. And all of a sudden, while he was talking, I had a horrible pain happen inside my body. I didn't know at the time that I even had ovarian cysts. This was all news to me, but I had a cyst on my right ovary that ruptured out of nowhere. And he said that the color drained from my face, and he stopped talking in that moment. Again, this is the only time on the whole trip that he was close to me, because usually he was about a mile down the river. And wow. I communicated as best as I could. Something ruptured internally. And I remember I was wearing a dress. I put my hand under the dress to see if I was pouring blood or what is coming out of me. And it was all internal. The best way I can describe it is when a water balloon hits you and it bursts, but it was inside my body. And then it was debilitating pain. And I am a fainter when I give blood at the hospital. That is just something that I let everyone know I'm going to faint. So all of the symptoms of that began to come through, the tunnel vision. All I see is the teal water and the teal of my kayak right in front of me. It starts to turn and go sideways. And I communicated, I think I'm going to faint, and I am fainting now. And from his vantage point, what he described this as, he said that I immediately slumped over to the left. I lost consciousness, and my boat began to tip over, and my hair went in. And he grabbed the boat and held it there, and then pushed his paddle up against this one area where there was about a 20, 30 foot drop off, but he was able to get himself to right where the embankment was, but there was no way to get off the river because there was a giant cliffside that hung right against us. So there was really no way to get out and onto the land. So all of this happened in the boat. And then he thought that I might have had a seizure. But then as he recalled it, he said I didn't have a seizure, but my body went up and I went into this like almost like a crucifixion. I don't know. Like I went it out like this, and it corresponded with my experience on the other side. But I went unconscious for several minutes, and he was just trying to make sure that I was still here. And my experience was very different, and I was catapulted out of my body immediately. And I remember the first thing I saw was I was in this ethereal land. I love the picture behind your head. If you can imagine, those rays of light are the brightest, most beautiful colors, almost like a sunset or a sunrise, with the oranges and the pinks and the reds and the purples. But it was a larger spectrum of color than I had anticipated or ever seen. And it was so bright, and I was elevated and floating in it. It was like I was in my body and outside of my body at the same time, sort of hovering in this no man's land of light and colors. I call it the lands of light and colors. And the thing that I saw was there was a Native American woman, and she was far away. And I did not talk to her, but there was a Native American elder, a man, and his face was right up against mine. So I could see this giant face. But I knew he was Native American. It almost felt like we were related. We were connected in some way. And the first thing that he said, he was so peaceful and so calm. And the first thing he said to me is, "Don't worry, you're not going to die today." Because that was the final thought I had as I started to slump over on the boat, lose consciousness, and all I saw was tunnel vision of the water. And it was terrifying. My last conscious thought was, this is it. I'm dead. I'm done now. And so he assured me with such peace and excitement. He was very excited to see me. And he said, "Don't worry, you're not going to die today. You're here to be activated." And that's when he reached out his hand and he touched my solar plexus. And that's the moment that in the vision, in this other realm, I was like electrified into this open position where I like raised up, my body moved up into the sky, and I was wide open. And it's so hard to explain when you're on this realm because it is so different. But it was like every single cell of my body felt like it was in a complete and total orgasm. And I remember having a judgmental thought about this because I do come from a fundamentalist Christian background. And there was a judgment that I had about, like, this is wrong. I'm not supposed to, like, what is this? It felt like almost like a sexual experience without there being any sexual experience. And it was not in any way sexual, but it was buzzing every single cell of my body. And he said, "You are being initiated." And there was this calm and this peace. And I felt some other beings, almost like angelic beings. And they were like soothing this fear, this Christian judgment that I carried with me. And they said, like, this is not wrong. That there's no perversion here. This is all grace and light. And I remember fighting my conscious brain to allow my defenses to go down and to just be in the experience until that all melted away. And I was just suspended in this energy of complete love and bliss and openness. And I could feel it in every cell of my being. And it was incredible. In fact, it was really hard to leave this space, but there was a pull on the other end. There was a pull back to the earth, which I wasn't fully conscious of. Besides, all of a sudden, after a few minutes of just being suspended in this bliss, getting this activation, a lot of this was telepathic communication. I was getting this message about this was as a result of me starting this ancestral work. And then there was something really important for me to go back with to support people in healing their ancestry and healing the patterns.
Yes.
And that was sort of downloaded into my psyche as this experience was happening. And then I was being jolted out. And I saw a long hallway to my right, and down the hallway, all the way down to the left, there was a room. And out of that room, there was a voice saying, "Come back, come back, come back." And it reminded me of a plant medicine ceremony, actually an animal medicine, bufu, frog medicine. It reminded me of being in a medicine circle with other shamanic practitioners, because I've been able to study with many different curanderos and curanderas and different beautiful medicine carriers. And in a moment, it just felt like that's what was happening. My rational brain was trying to fit where this voice is coming from. And so I thought, oh, maybe I'm in a medicine circle and the facilitator's calling me back because my turn is up and I'm coming back to my body. And instead, when I finally came to and opened my eyes, I saw the blue of the kayak, I saw the water, and I heard my partner's voice shaking me, saying, "Come back, come back, come back," really concerned because he wasn't sure if I was dead or not. He was terrified. So he was very triggered by this, but he also has military training in helping people who have gunshot wounds, right? So he was really a great person to support me and track the vitals. And I remember coming back into my body for just a moment and feeling horrible pain. It was so intense, I couldn't stay in my body. And then I slipped away again, and I went back to that light and colors and this infinite love. And it was this pull, because he was trying to bring me back to my body. And I was like, wow, it's so much nicer to be over here. I don't want to come back because this human vessel is filled with pain and suffering. Oh, as I got like a pain in that ovary, which is still healing, by the way. The doctors didn't know what to do with me. And there's a second chapter to what this happened, because initially I didn't have health insurance at the time. I was in a different state, and I like to treat things holistically and naturally when possible. It's not always possible, but I like to go in that direction first. And I remember telling my partner, do not take me to the ER. Do not take me to the hospital. And he really did not like that, but he decided to honor my wishes, but my condition did worsen. And I was in a lot of pain for several weeks. And it got to another point where I was trying to go to certain clinics. I wasn't really getting any information. A lot of people wouldn't see me until I had the health insurance instated. So that was a whole journey. And once I went to the hospital, I had some tests done, and they couldn't release the results of the test. Besides, they told me that everything was good enough for me to safely leave, and they weren't going to hold me in the hospital. And this was 3 weeks after that event, and I was still having debilitating stabbing pains in that one ovary. Was really trying to get some medical advice about it, because the worst case scenario was it was an ovarian torsion, which could send me to the hospital to have to get emergency surgery. And they were able to rule that was ruled out. They were able to tell me that, it's not the worst case scenario. You should still get some follow-ups. And at that point, with that news, we figured, well, that's great news, right? So we had the kayaks on the car. We were out of the hospital like 9 a.m. We had all of this time left over. And so we said, why don't we throw the kayaks in the river? And this was in New York. This was in the Saratoga area, because I was at the Saratoga hospital. And what is so funny is that my NDE had a chapter 2 that no one was anticipating, that happened 6 hours on the river right outside of the hospital 3 weeks later. And what ended up happening was we journeyed on I guess it was more of a creek. We went down the creek quite a bit, maybe about a mile and a half. And then all of a sudden I started to have what the doctors were referring to as near syncope episodes, where you have your vitals go all wonky, your heart rate changes quite rapidly. And I was having my fingers and my toes start to go numb. And then I would feel really, really panicky, because I could feel my spirit start lifting out of my body. And I had these episodes nonstop, which is why I was going to the hospital, because after this experience and after the original near-death experience, it was quite a while until we could get our kayaks down the river. By the way, going back to that original experience, my partner got out of his kayak and it began to float down the river with his cell phone in it. And his fishing line and hook that he had in his boat got caught on a fallen tree. So it just hovered there nearby, so we didn't lose the boat. And it took a while to get me back to shore, because every few meters I would start having these near syncope episodes. And even though it was so blissful and so beautiful on the other side, and there was a part of me that never wanted to come back, there was also a part of me that was terrified to almost die, because it felt like I had died. I mean, when you learn about near-death experiences and you talk about DMT that's released in the brain, it was like a DMT journey, because DMT is released in the brain when we're born and when we die. They call it the spirit molecule. And I was just so afraid as these near syncope episodes were happening. I'd never had these health problems. This was all out of the blue. Again, on my right side, which represents the masculine, which represents the father. And this was all ancestral stuff I was working on, because I am essentially related through lineage of rape. And that's one of the things that has showed up in my personal story, my childhood, different aspects of trauma that I've had to resolve and that I help others with. So it was an interesting intergenerational pattern that had happened to other members of my family on my father's side as well, that was being looked at. So I was feeling that there was a connection there. And when I meditated into it, it was like there was a lot of trauma and sadness that was being stored in these cysts on my ovaries that were compiling all of this emotion that then burst, right? This like cracking open, this rupturing, and this shifting of a pattern and a breaking of a pattern. And when I went back to the more recent experience, 3 weeks after the original near-death experience, where I'm on this kayak, I started to have these near syncope episodes again, where I would begin to like not be able to breathe right. I remember communicating with my partner, just putting my hands in the water, just splashing myself with water to cool myself down because I was overheating. It was also like very hot in the summer, and I believe that was probably part of this, although the doctors they've never seen this happen to anyone.
Wow, yeah.
Every single one, my gynecologist, they're like, this is really something different, and are actually really quite moved by the story that I shared with them. So as I'm on this kayak, this is happening for the second time, I'm communicating with my partner. I'm afraid this might happen again. Can you just monitor me? And I remember having this moment of starting to lift out of my body, where I could now look down over my body, just struggling to breathe and have the involuntary functions.
Unbelievable.
But my consciousness was now lifted, and I was looking down at myself. And as I was lifted, I was met by ancestors on both sides of my lineage. And they came and they assured me that this was the only way, without taking me to the other side, for me to start the work that I had, or to complete the work that I had started. They reminded me, you did this, you started this when you went on this trip, and now it's time to wrap it up and bring it to a closure, which was really profound, because they started to show me that there was healing that needed to be done for my ancestral lineage, for Pocahontas, for her father, for the heartbreak in her community. She was ripped away from her husband, her 2 children. She was already married before she was forced into marriage to my ancestor, who it's actually also debatable, was that really the father, the father of the child, because there was a lot of sex trafficking that happened with Pocahontas that most people don't know unless they listen to the oral traditions of her siblings who went to England with her and recounted what they saw happen, including her being poisoned on the ship on the way back, and her letting them know that she was poisoned right before she died. So there's a whole history that most people don't know. We have like the Happy Disney version. But in this case, I was confronted with her and the soul loss that she had experienced. And I was also confronted with my white colonizer ancestors and their mothers, who were crying over the sins of essentially the men taking advantage of and raping Pocahontas. And there were all these tears that were being shed. And I saw 3 of the men who had sex trafficked and were part of the kidnapping that happened to take her overseas to go to England. And it was during that moment that they were asking for forgiveness, and their mothers were crying for the sins that they had committed. And my Native American ancestor, who I had met on the other side, he was there and he was saying, forgive them. It's time to forgive them. We need to forgive what has happened and healed us now. And so there was a massive soul retrieval that happened for my ancestors on both sides. There was a huge soul retrieval that happened for Pocahontas, for her father, for her community, for the land. And it was so profound. And my guides, as they kept taking me out of my body, by the way, I had about maybe 12 near syncope episodes over the course of 6 hours on this waterway. And my partner couldn't get me to, we didn't have a rope. He towed me with a rope the first time, but we didn't have the rope this time. And he knew that I was in an experience because I was crying uncontrollably. And I just reached out to him and said, babe, these aren't my tears, but I have to cry them. These are the tears of the women in my ancestral lineage that need to be released. And I could feel when I put my fingers and my feet into the water, because that was the only way I could stay in my body from leaving, was to sort of put my legs on either side of the kayak and put them in the water. And I could feel a cord of energy moving from my feet and my fingers in the water through the waterways to Virginia. I could feel the connection. They were showing me that the water molecules of the earth are all connected. And so I am connected to the place where this energy started. They also told me that the partner that I'm with is also part Native American as well. He's half colonizer, and he's part Native American for the region where we live, where, upstate New York, where he's from and I now live. So we had this moment of, you needed to move through this energy with someone who could hold space because of their ancestral lineage. And there was this whole unraveling of understanding as I was out of my body and hovering over and coming back in and tapping out and going back and sort of hovering between the worlds and just trying to maintain consciousness as best as I could, although I was above water or at the same time looking down. The message was, for a while, I went through a phase a couple of years ago where I was so angry at the white man. This resentment and this anger came from me that I know is not mine. And I actually really love everybody a lot. And I remember feeling that I couldn't marry a white man. So my second husband was Jamaican. And that is a whole other can of worms, Jamaican and Grenadian. And I was so connected to, he has to, there's a reason why I'm with someone who is not white. And my guides were showing me that I was working through some of the ancestral pieces of the grudges that were being held within my lineage, within my DNA, of this indigenous versus white colonizer energy that I was there to heal. And what a journey. All of these pieces that didn't seem related were all coming together. My guides were showing me, this is why you're with this person right now. This is why you went through this marriage. This is why you had all of these issues come up to be healed. And it was so overwhelming. I didn't know how to integrate it for a while. All I could do is just be in this realm of, wow, I can't believe that I've been somewhere else. Some might say it was the other side. Some might say it was a DMT journey. It's hard to say, but the background, just imagine all the most beautiful colors coming out from it. But ever since then, there was a time when I ceremonially smoked marijuana, and my guides brought me to this place of integration where I felt like I was being lifted out of my body. This was several months later. I was being lifted out of my body, and it felt like I was hovering between the worlds again. But then they brought all of this bliss that was integrated into my energetic cells, and the other realm was all beginning to integrate into my being here. And it was almost like I went back into that orgasmic state all over again. I remember I was giggling and laughing and just being super silly. And it was just such a beautiful integration of, my guides were saying, you need to anchor what you went through there and bring it back to body. And in addition to that, after the first near-death experience, I also had to have a soul retrieval to bring my spirit back into my body, because I had completely became untethered. And I could feel that there was a part of my soul that was hovering above me on the Mattapony River in Virginia, that was missing. And I had to call that back. And when I called that part of myself back, I felt very much embodied. I felt grounded again. And until that happened, I felt very fuzzy. I felt like I had one foot here in this realm, but a lot of me was in the other realm. And honestly, it was hard to come back here, and it was depressing for a while to be here because of how beautiful the other side was. And then I was left with a lot of pain, some medical emergencies, and the doctors, honestly, they still to this day, they have no idea what to tell me besides I had an ovarian cyst rupture. It can happen like this, but it's very rare. They've never seen anyone have these experiences like that. And I ended up going back to the hospital. I went back to the ER the next day because I could barely walk and stand. I was having these near syncope episodes constantly. I couldn't even drive. I had to call my partner away from a job that he was working on to say, I didn't even have to say it. I said, I think I'm in trouble. He walked in. He said, we're going to the ER right now. I said, okay, we're going.
So finally, after all that time, you finally then went to the hospital, have this taken care of? Or were you in the hospital in and out over that period of time?
I was in and out of the hospital. I was in the hospital for all the tests. And then we thought I was cleared and ready. The kayaks were on the car. We stopped kayaking after this. And that was so heartbreaking because we loved to kayak. And I was terrified. I was terrified to go out alone. I've only gone kayaking alone once since because, I mean, once that happens, it's, what if there wasn't someone there? He said, you were flipping over. That was it. You would have been gone and under. And I was unconscious for, I think he said 5 to 7 minutes. And we went to the hospital. They said I was clear. We went back on the boat. And then between then and the next day, I was just constantly in and out of body and having these beautiful spiritual epiphanies and these incredible encounters and downloads of information and integration of healing. But the pain was so bad. It was radiating up my back, down my leg. I could barely walk. I could barely stand. And I was so just in and out of body constantly that we went back to the ER. We stayed there for a day because no one could see me. It was a whole, I will refrain from talking about the regional hospitals in my area, but eventually I saw a doctor and they thought maybe I had a heart condition. I went to the cardiologist and my heart looks great. We have all these images of it now. And they just went through multiple specialists and no one could figure out what had happened. By the end of that time, I was urinating blood. And so I believe that there might have been an infection at the rupture site. That's my 2 cents, but I'm not a doctor. And they were able to say that we can see that there's an eruption site. There was a rupture that happened. And that was really all that they could say, and that this wasn't normal. They've never seen anything like it. They never thought it would be to this degree. And they still call me their little medical mystery.
When they said that they had never seen anything like it, you mean that particular condition was that unique to have something like this happen?
Now, I've read up a bunch, and I've seen that women who have cysts, ovarian cysts that rupture, it is incredibly painful and it lasts for up to 6 weeks, 6 to 12 weeks. Yeah. I think mine lasted for about 3 months. I still periodically get stabbing pains in that area. I've been back for imaging since, and they really still have no cause for concern. Everything looks, like I have some small ovarian cysts that they don't believe should be an issue. So I've read that it is possible to faint during these episodes, but the people that I've talked to that's happened to, because my cousin was one of them, none of them have had any experience on the other side or had any kind of images come up for them. And I was just catapulted out. Like I said, it felt like a DMT journey. And maybe it wasn't a near-death experience. Like, I don't know what it was besides I was ejected out of my body to the other realm to continue the deep work that I had started. Mm-hmm. And my guys, they blamed it on me. They're like, you started this, but we did tell you. We told you to do this, and you opened this up because, again, I followed the breadcrumbs of there's something important here. And I believe that a lot of things have moved and healed as a result in my own life, in what I know of my family members who I am in contact with. This really shifted a lot of things for the patterns of the women in my family are all beginning to break. And from an external outsider's view, I'm able to see that this all connects with the work that I felt like I was being guided to resolve for my lineage and mostly for myself. But now I'm seeing those results trickle out to the life of my sister, who is now leaving an abusive partner of many years. And she was never going to leave, but there was like a almost like the shift that happened when I divorced my ex-husband. All of these women in my family who were unhappy were starting to question their relationship and to honor their self-worth, their self-value, and want more for themselves. So from the little bit that I've heard from secondhand from other family members, there was almost like an earthquake, and there was a reverberation of shifts that happened externally in my family as a result.
All these women, you would say, were paying the price or suffering the same karma that went all the way back to Pocahontas? Would that be an accurate way to assess that?
What I was being shown is that the women in my family have stayed in emotionally void relationships that they were forced into in some way and were afraid to leave. And instead of feeling full and complete and joyful, they were making themselves smaller in situations that were not expanding their highest good. So, for example, my ex-husband, God bless his heart, I still love him so much, and I will always love him. And I just wish him so many blessings. He helped me so much on my journey. But we would go into these dynamics that reminded me of my dad kind of belittling my mom and making her smaller so that she couldn't thrive. And I was seeing all of these things play out. At one point, I felt like this grief in my face, like my lips were downturning, and I felt this sadness that I could see in my mother's face throughout her entire marriage. She was so depressed. And now I'm finding out from my uncle, who's a pastor, that the same time that I divorced my ex-husband, my mother started to think about what would life be like if she weren't married to my father. I'm starting to, for the first time, he has said, like, start to break free from some layers of control. And I saw this start to happen with my family, but this message was, you have to heal this. And I know that there's been a lot of rape and sexual abuse that's happened in multiple generations within my family on that side of the family that relates to that lineage. And so my guides were showing me that this is the pattern and it needs to end. And go to the waterways and just go. And so I went with an open heart, and I ended up going to the other side and back. And I don't know if I'll ever fully integrate that beyond the message that they continue to tell me every time I use the drums and I journey to go back to that place and go back for more information and meditate to those guides. Meanwhile, one of the things that's really interesting is my first spirit guide was a Native American elder that was one of my ancestors named Chief. And I found out that they called Pocahontas's father Chief Mattaponi. And so I believe that that's who I met when I was on the other side. And it took me a couple months until I had that aha moment of, I've been working with Chief since the beginning of my shamanic journey of connecting with my guides. And now I realize that I believe that this is one of my lineage ancestors that I was having this activation with. But the message was, you veered off of your path and too far into the grief spiral, and this grief is not even fully yours. You are feeling it for multiple generations. And that's why I was crying and purging and like putting my hands in the water. And it felt like these tears and these emotions were being transmuted and transmitted into the water that were healing and moving to the ancestral lands.
Right. So, and it all went back to Pocahontas, I guess, but it's extraordinary how it took so many generations of women to carry that karma, if you want to call it that, before somebody ended up in your ancestral chain, namely yourself, that was actually able to finally resolve it for the entire ancestral, and which not only vertically but horizontally with respect to the other members currently in your family now. And I definitely relate to this, and I'll explain briefly one reason why. Maybe we shared this back when we were working in the past, but I practice a spiritual healing technique called Jorei. And the primary function I believe that Jorei satisfies is healing ancestral karma. So the fact that we are even having this discussion about this makes so much sense to me in terms of now what my own personal work is, in terms of the things that I feel that I had to resolve in my own life that were karmically related. But then also it acknowledges how prevalent this is in terms of human history, that all these people that are living now on this planet and going through all this craziness, how much of that is actually unresolved karma in the ancestral world. And I want to share this one episode with you because I was going to talk, and we're getting close to our time now. There's so much that we can talk about, and we're going to have follow-up shows to this. But I had an experience 22 years ago. I think I might have shared this, or at least I told you that I was going to talk about it. And it had to do with, there was a movie that came out 22 years ago called Pearl Harbor. It was an amazing, blockbuster kind of movie, and I didn't see it in the theater. But about 2 years later, I bought the DVD and I watched it with my friend. And all of a sudden, you get to that point in the movie where the attack is happening and the bombs are starting to drop and the people are dying in the boats. And it was so vividly enacted in that movie that I'm watching it and actually could feel in my body the experience of what those people must have been enduring. And I began to cry in a way that it just was like, you would say, pour out of you. But more than that, all of a sudden, it was almost like a veil had passed that had been lifted, and I was surrounded by all these souls that were in suffering. And it was amazing after the fact. It only lasted about 30 seconds to a minute where I actually had this experience. And my eyes are wide open. It wasn't like I was trancing or anything, but it was just something about connecting to the sadness of the people and the pain and the suffering of those souls that had died there somehow opened me up and to understanding what really is there that still needs to be healed. And in a small way, you had that experience, but the experience that I had, I could not believe it. It wasn't like individual souls. I felt like it was like one of those things that you might see in Paradise Lost or something, one of those depictions where these souls are almost packed like sardines and they're all in agony. And I was there in the middle of them. And then all of a sudden, as I began to come out of it, they all disappeared and I was back in the room watching the movie. So I just wanted to share that with you. I've never shared that publicly. And I felt it was appropriate because of how it fits in with our message and our mission in terms of why are we even sharing these stories? Why did they happen to us? And I think it's because we are at a point now where perhaps the veil is lifting or it's getting thinner. My good friend Anthony Citro, I've done so many shows with him on the ascension process. And I believe that we're meant to do a follow-up show at some point with him to include him in this because again, he talks about how, yes, the consciousness of this planet is rising, and all this negativity, all this soul suffering has to be purified if we're ever, as a planet and as a human race, to survive, to get to that paradise. And all the religions talk about some sort of paradise, whether it's Buddhist traditions, Christian traditions, or so forth. They describe something called a paradise on earth, a heaven on earth, and a kingdom of heaven. So anyway, I appreciate you listening to that. Maybe we can talk about that some other time. I don't think I want to take the time. Unless you have a question about that you want to ask me, I'd be happy to answer it.
Well, I just want to reflect that as you were telling me that, I was feeling so many chills over my body as you were talking about that. And before you even said it, I felt like all of these packed spirits came around. I was like, okay, there's lots here now. And then you said that they were packed like sardines all around me. So I absolutely felt that for about maybe a minute while you were telling the story. I went to full body chills. My legs are just like twitching with chills. And then I felt a massive presence around. And whenever I have handled those realms of suffering beings or a trauma that happened or someone who took their own life, I feel those presences come, and I absolutely 100% agree that we are here to alchemize this process. And in shamanism, we have the tools for that. It's psychopomp. It's escorting those souls to the afterlife. And if they are stuck here roaming, then the consciousness is lowered because they attach to people and they don't know that they have these other suffering beings with them. And when we heal that and integrate the fragments into people's souls who are living and then cross them over to reunite with the rest of those people's souls or to fully cross them if they are here because they are so fragmented, which is a whole another topic for another day that I love to talk on. It's the important work that we are here to do to raise the consciousness, which is to process through these giant traumas that are happening to groups of people, civilizations, to really ascend those energies to lighten the load on this planet. So I 100% agree with you. That resonates. And I felt those things right before and as you were telling that story. So if you needed that confirmation, I wonder if there's anyone in our audience, if they can comment, did anyone else feel anything when that was shared? Because it's not just us, right? We are so many enlightened, empathic beings who are probably connected and pulled into the show. So I always love to read the comments and see what's coming through for people as we're telling these stories.
Well, I hope that as the word spreads, that we do get more people to come. I know that this was meant to be a series. I didn't want to intimidate you by thinking that it had to be, but something inside of me said that it is meant to be a series, and that we're going to, perhaps the next one we'll do live in a Q&A. We'll discuss it and figure out the best way to do that. And I would like for Anthony to come on in the future to do a show with us, to bring on his experience and expertise with what he knows about the ascension process and the ascension alignment. And I'm sure there's others that'll be drawn and participate in this series of shows. I'm super excited. The Bridge of Truth is back, and you're here to help me and to be a part of this. And amazing. We've come through it. I went through 4 surgeries in the past 2 years. My mother and sister passed away at the end of the year. We've really been through a lot, and there's a reason, and we're here, and we're here to do work. And so I want to thank you so much for staying with us and for going. I had questions about things that I can't even about what happened while you were there. Maybe in the Q&A we'll talk about it more. Maybe some of the other people that watch will come up with it as well. I'd love to know what your boyfriend was experiencing, like what his perception of it. But it's too much to go into that now. I'd rather leave on this high note. It was just an amazing thing. So, Kristen, thank you so much, and let's talk about doing this again. Let's put the message out there. I'll be. We'll do a live premiere like I did with Sheikha Mariam's videos, which will allow people to interact with you while they're seeing the video for the first time. It's really a fun new thing that YouTube has allowed us to do. And then maybe we'll do a full-blown live event after that at some point. So thank you so much, Kristen, for being a part of this. And if there's any last-minute thing you'd like to say, otherwise I'll just close it out for the both of us.
I'm just so grateful for you that we've reconnected, and listeners, let us know what resonates with you. This content is all for you and to support you on your journey. And so we love to hear your comments and read through them and learn suggestions about ways to do this that align with us all connecting and normalizing that the supernatural afterlife experiences absolutely happen to many of us. And there's a place to be validated and to know that you're not the only one experiencing these things. So many blessings to all of our listeners.
But I'm thinking as we're talking about the possibility of bringing other, as people leave their comments, we might find a few stories that somehow resonate, or we feel might be somebody that we'd actually want to bring as an independent person out there in the world, and just to share their experience live like this, because there's only so much that you can do through text, and there are times when the person really needs to be present, and we can all share openly like that. So that's another thing that I never thought about it like that, but because I've been kind of like limiting it to the people that I know, but no, there's people out there that are going to come into our lives that have really amazing things to share, and we can schedule them and find time and perhaps bring 3 or 4 on sometime and do a show like that. So thank you again, Kristen, and to all my followers out there, please leave your comments. Let us know what you want to know from us about what you just heard, and perhaps your own experiences that you want to share with us. So once again, thank you, and until next time, have wonderful, blessed journeys on the Bridge of Truth. Bye now.